we're going to focus on these markets. We're going to go over some of these. We're going to go over some market fundamentals and what's driving rental growth. And then we'll go over some rent growth and occupancy numbers. We'll talk about our income expense benchmarking survey we've been working on for a couple of years, and talk about some sales activity and talk about new construction, apartment absorption. And then we'll give you a few key points, what we think is going to happen in 2023. So we've got about 25 minutes to cover all this. So let's get started.
Yeah, so as Greg mentioned, we focus on secondary and tertiary markets of Texas. This map outlines and highlights a few of the key markets that we're currently working in or have previously been active in. And so you can find all this information on our website, gogettersmultifamily.com. The books on your table will have that information as well, along with data on maybe 8 to 10 of the most highlighted secondary and tertiary markets that we focus on. But again, gogettersmultifamily.com, that's going to be a wealth of knowledge to keep you up to speed with what's going on in these markets.
All right, so let's start off with Lubbock. Here's just the overview of a good market demographics. I'm really going to focus on the three main drivers. Texas Tech, obviously number one. We just hit a milestone, about 40,000 popular enrollments in 2020, and I believe they're roughly about 40,300 at the moment. And then cotton production, that'd probably be your second biggest. And really, the High Plains region produces about 1/4 of the nation's cotton crop. And then pretty much the medical district, so Covenant and UMC, serves about 1.5 million people across eastern New Mexico and the South Plains region. And then the other thing to probably take a note on is the population. We're sitting around 265, I believe, and pushing that 300,000 mark. So a lot of things going on in Lubbock. We're very excited about it.
Yeah, so a little bit as what they mentioned, we focus on secondary and tertiary markets, Central West Texas. This highlights a little bit about our database and the information that we have. A lot of it has been compiled together over the years, and it helps us be accurate to the markets that we serve specifically. So total, it's about 575,000 units over 4,000 properties. That's existing and units in the pipeline. If you're just doing existing projects, it's still 525,000 units across these markets that we serve.
All right, so now that we've talked about some of the markets that we're in, we'll talk about job growth. We're also going to talk about what happened in 2009 and during COVID and how well these markets handled those years. We're also going to talk about population and expected growth in each market.
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. This is job growth based off a 15-year average. It's comparing pretty much Texas, the United States, and then pretty much all the secondary and tertiary markets we cover. As you can see, Texas is quite a ways above the United States for job growth. And a lot of these secondary and tertiary markets are not too far off that. So we're very bullish on job growth in some of these secondary and tertiary markets.
All right, so if you just pay attention to the headlines and don't do your actual research, you might be convinced that the world's headed for disaster. In fact, some of the gurus have been predicting an economic collapse in the United States since 2014. Now, what would happen to your portfolios if you hadn't bought anything from 2014 to now? There's a huge difference. So our team, we did a study on what happened to jobs during 2008. The reason this is important is because job growth directly affects population, household growth, and when combined with supply, it affects occupancy rates and rental rates of the properties. So notice most of these markets did very well. Lubbock, for example, only lost 1.1% of their jobs. This is much better than the United States did as a whole. The United States is down, 4.3%. So you'll notice, it's comforting to know that these markets did well in the worst recession over time. They were very stable. This next slide shows how long in years it took to get back to 2008 job levels. Within 3 years, Lubbock was back to normal job growth.
The second greatest collapse in recent years for jobs in our economy, in the United States economy, was COVID. This is in specifically January to April of 2020. And so what that's measuring here is the United States, it was far worse in 2009 when it came to jobs. We were down about 15%. Texas just a little bit better than that, almost down 10% or so, and Lubbock just under 10%. But what really is important here, again, to highlight I guess there's no such thing as recession proof, but three-pronged approach to our economy is, Greg, if you flip to the next slide here, it only took about 19 months for Lubbock, along with the rest of Texas, as a whole to recover to pre-January 2020 job levels during COVID. So the United States, we're not even quite back yet. I know there's a big talk in the news today, but Texas and Lubbock, again, just like Jackson said, we're very bullish on the growth here because of our rebound from jobs. So again, highlighting our population and continuing the conversation on growth. Lubbock as a whole right now in the city limits, we're somewhere around 265,000 people. We have an estimate here of about 263,000 people. Within the county, we're probably somewhere in 320,000 by most people's estimates. But it's really cool to see the growth. This expected growth, this black line here is showing about a 1% population growth year over year for the next 5 years, maybe a 5% rent growth in 5 years, or population growth in 5 years. But really what's cool to see is in a town like Lubbock or in some of these secondary and tertiary markets is it's a lot of physical growth. You can actually go and see and touch what's happening. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
All right, so we've covered fundamentals and how well we did during COVID in 2009. Next, let's talk about rent growth and occupancy in these markets. We'll also cover affordability and what it costs to rent versus what it costs to own.
All right, so looking up here, I'm sure as you guys are aware, if you're considering investing in a project and taking on a multi-family investment in any of these markets, it's important to know what your occupancy is going to be and what to underwrite for your rent growth. So this is showing basically based off mainland apartment data, what the rent growth is and also the current occupancy for all these markets that we serve. Some of the best market growth that we had over the past year was Midland. They had over 16%, as well as Waco had over 13%. Right here in Lubbock, we did have good, healthy rent growth of 5.6% rent growth, and we are above 90% occupied right here in our home city.
One of the most important factors of rent growth and occupancy is who's living there. And so your tenant base or really your homeowner base. And so in a place like Lubbock, it's been really good in the recent years, especially now. There's about a $261 gap between the average cost of a rent and average cost of a mortgage. Or average cost to own a home, I should say. And so right now, that's a pretty healthy gap, indicating that it's much more affordable, significantly more affordable to stay in your apartment and continue to rent than it would be to buy a home. So that looks good for multifamily. In some of these other markets, you may want to be careful when you're looking at deals in, say, San Angelo or Midland, Odessa right now, where there's a $20 or $40 gap. You're really going to be competing with people leaving your property to go and buy a home. And so you're going to have to work to find new ways to compete against that.
All right, so now we're going to share with you some good information on underwriting apartments in West Texas. You want to take some notes here. It's probably something you're not going to find anywhere else. Quick show of hands, how many of you have seen the NAA's income expense survey they put out once a year? Okay, all right. So a quick, this is a national survey. The average unit size in this survey is 267 units. You're comparing different markets, coastal cities to Midwest. You can't compare the Big Apple to the hub city. So what we did on our team is we did every deal that we've underwritten, we put it in a sheet so that we can keep track of what's going on and how much does a water bill cost in San Angelo, vice versa. So we've got a lot of good data. Jackson's can go over that and compare it to the NAA.
Yeah, so basically what Greg said, this is pretty much the same thing the NAA did, but it's for the secondary and tertiary markets alone. So if y'all want to take notes of this is something you're not going to find. And this can change, if you want data for Lubbock, Midland, Odessa only separate, we can get that to you afterwards. But here's an overview of pretty much going on from a income line all the way down to your expenses, pretty much down to your NOI, and this is consolidated into the biggest groups. But as you can see here, you're looking about 42% NOI for secondary and tertiary markets. NAA's was 60, so you definitely would want to look at this if you're investing only in these regions. But it's really just a good thing to take note of, and really important that you must take note of this. So.
All right, so now we'll go over sales activity for each market. In order for us to keep up with all the activity that's going on, we check on a regular basis about 40 different sources to find out what's on the market. So some brokerages don't put their listings on public sites. So not only do we look on the CoStars and LoopNets, Crexys, all those, but we go to individual broker websites and keep a list of what all's available. So we're going to talk about sales activity from this. We'll talk about rent growth and interest rates and how they affect their returns. And then we'll talk about the importance of having a great property management.
Yeah, so going off the apartment sales activity, So this is roughly off of 90 properties, about 7,300 units on the market right now. And again, this is secondary and tertiary markets. Pretty much we track, there's over about 40 multiple listing services that we took data from. And so it's about 64 properties, 4,600 units sold in 22. And next slide, we'll kind of go over some average numbers here. So you're looking about an average cap rate right about 5%, average price per door. You're looking about 70,000, gross with multiplier 7.7, and then average price per square foot, $89. And Ryan will go over pretty much the same aspect, but in just for Lubbock alone.
Yeah, looking at the same thing, but just here in Lubbock in our home market. Currently right now, 10 properties are on the market for over 900 units. In 2022, there were 24 transactions that happened on the market for, 1,800 units that sold. Go to the next slide.
I got a question.
Huh?
Is that including like duplexes, or what are you considering multifamily?
Really anything over 5 units. There aren't duplexes in this one. Go.
Yeah, I guess moving forward, on this kind of hitting on the same topic, in Lubbock, a lot of people, with 2021 being such a record year, this year, maybe it felt like a lot of things hit the brakes whenever interest rates rose. As you can see, 2021, there was 36 transactions that happened. So now the question is, are transactions still happening? What's going on in Lubbock? If you see, 24 transactions still happen here in town. So Lubbock's still been really strong. Going back to 2019 and 2020, we're still over 10 transactions more in multifamily than we were a few years ago. So Lubbock's been doing really well this year.
All right, so this shows you how interest rates and rent growth affect your 5-year internal rate of return, which is, a lot of investors that we speak with on a daily basis, their target returns 15% over 5 years. So yes, interest rates did change. This is actual property we underwrote with agency financing on it. Every 1% change of interest rate only affected the return by about 2%. But if you talk about rent growth, every percentage change of rent growth over 5 years could change it 4.5%. So even with today's rise in interest rates, investors can still hit their target returns if they can achieve that higher rent growth and maintain steady expenses. Okay, so this, if you can see the blue line here, this shows Lubbock's area median income. Right now, it's right under 58,000. Now the red line is where rents are. These are contract rents, which is what ALN's shown, adding utilities. Now HUD, they have metrics, affordability metrics. That if you pay over 30% of your income in rent, then it's considered rent burden. Right now, Lubbock, on average, people are paying 20% of their income on rent. So there's a 10% gap, or $474 that can be made up. So theoretically, what this is saying is that in Lubbock, we can raise rents 11.5% a year for the next 5 years before we hit the affordability threshold. So now we've seen the importance of rent growth. We're going to talk about property management.
So nobody in here is a stranger to good property management. Many of you run extremely tight ships and have some great properties. And so really what we're talking about here when it comes to the importance of property management, it comes down to your bottom line. For a few years now, basically your numbers matter more now than ever. And they always have, but for the past several years, what we've noticed is maybe an inconsistency when it comes to calculating an NOI. Some people are really bullish on pro forma, and they were using short-term bridge debt, and that was acceptable, and that was the accepted means of coming up with financials. Whereas now, those financials are definitely going to be more scrutinized. And so coming up with a consistency in how your NOI, how you arrive at your NOI is going to be very important, but also too, what every dollar at your bottom line, how that affects your property value. Jackson gave some stats of the average secondary market. The cap rate for that market was roughly 5% over the last year. Well, if you take every $1 and put that at a 5% cap rate, that affects your property value, your capitalized property value by $25 or $20, excuse me. And so $20 doesn't seem like much, but even using a 6% cap rate, if you added a $25 rent bump across 100 units, that's a $300,000 increase in capitalized value to your property just with a $25 rent bump. And when we're talking near 6% rent growth over the last year, that's a really important metric to keep in mind when you're in your day-to-day business and looking at your numbers.
Okay, so I'm sure it seems like everywhere you look, there's new apartments coming up. We're going to talk about the construction pipeline in Lubbock and apartment absorption. I mean, many of you see driving down Milwaukee or 114th or 1585, you'll see new apartments coming up. There's some great developers here in the room. We'll talk about some of these projects.
All right, so yeah, this just shows new units in the pipeline and all these markets that we're serving. Looking in Lubbock, over 2,000 units in the pipeline, and that might sound like a lot, but we know what Grant and Jackson are about to cover a little bit more. That doesn't mean they're not necessarily all being built this year, but maybe they're more in the works.
Yeah, so this is your annual absorption based off the past 12 months. As you can see, there was 2,000 units in the pipeline for Lubbock. You're seeing 310. One thing not to freak out here, a lot of these projects are planned out to 2 to 3 years ahead, and some haven't even started yet. So that is one thing to take consideration into. And Grant will kind of go into more detail on what's going on in Lubbock. But here's just an overview of what the annual absorption is for all the secondary and tertiary markets.
So here's a quick guide of most of the properties that are in the pipeline that make up those 2,000 units. We can get this to anybody that likes some more additional information. Out of 2,000 units in the pipeline for Lubbock right now, there's roughly 1,400 units that are in the pipeline in the planning phase. That's maybe 15 deals. And so, like Jackson said, these are going to be several years out. So in order to kind of accommodate for, 2,000 seems like a lot, maybe doesn't seem like a lot, we pulled some data from the last 7 years. Greg's showing up on the screen here. And some of these numbers are a little bit blurry. Again, we can get this information to you. But basically, in 2017, we had over 1,500 units in the pipeline for Lubbock. And so we're no stranger to having this many units come online. What this shows us, though, is that in, say, 2019, there were 1,000 units in the pipeline, and maybe 300 of those got built in 2020, vice versa in 2020. And so in 2021, the important number for you guys was there was 1,500 units in the pipeline, and last year there was over 500 units that came online in Lubbock. So we meet our absorption levels pretty well within a certain guideline. So this 2,000 units in the pipeline is going to be really good for the next 3-4 years in Lubbock.
All right, so here's some key issues that we see moving into 2023. We're going to briefly talk about interest rates, upcoming loan maturities, and some great things happening in Lubbock.
Yeah, I wish I could be here today to say I have a crystal ball to say where interest rates are going. I don't, so I'll let Grant talk more about that. But anyways, really, again, it is a concern. Obviously, Greg went over pretty much how that affects your IRR, just, that 1% change in interest rates. I will say, just to give an overview of what's going on, I would say your agency debts, you're looking probably mid-5s to low 6s on interest rates. And then your typical bank loan, you're probably in about 8.5s, even pushing 9. So definitely is a concern, but I wish I could tell you where that's going. Greg will kind of touch more on bridge debt here.
All right, a second thing that we're going to see a lot coming up this year is upcoming loan maturities for bridge loans. We went to a conference last year in Dallas, is a big multifamily lender. They said 80% of the loans that they did in 2020 and 21 were bridge loans. And most of the time, the bridge loans come with 2 or 3 year terms with a couple extensions. So what that means this year and next year, there's going to be a lot of these loans coming due. And if the properties aren't performing and aren't stabilized when they have to go to refinance, they may have to bring money to closing to get them refinanced. So it's critical that the properties are stabilized and performing top notch so that you can hit these refinances. Now, we don't have all headwinds. We've talked about 2 things that they're kind of coming against us, but there's a lot of great things coming up in Lubbock this year. Grant and Ryan are going to talk about.
Yeah, so I never thought I'd be really excited about a highway, but it's kind of cool to see that TxDOT started working on the outer loop here, especially if you drive south of town. It's very visible to see, so that's awesome. And then we've been talking for years about Lefrino Foods and them bringing 650 jobs to Lubbock. And estimates from LEDA, we've heard fall of 24 is basically when they're supposed to have their doors open. At least that's the estimate for now. I mean, so it's just really cool to see when you talk about population growth and rent growth and is Lubbock growing. The nice thing about being in this size city, you can really go and see it and touch it and talk to the people who are involved in it. And so we're really excited about that. And I know, Ryan, you got a few things here to highlight about the schools.
Yeah, so obviously schools are really big here in Lubbock. We've got the university, Texas Tech University, as I mentioned here earlier, over 40,000 attendance and continuing to grow. Texas Tech has really been a strong university and continuing to improve as well. There's been a lot of investment into the athletic facilities too, the $200 million investment, as I'm sure some of you are aware, with the stadium and athletics. When you look at the high schools, both Lubbock, Cooper, and Friendship are building new high schools as well. So really a lot of things are trending towards just a lot of growth in Lubbock. years to come are looking well, and we're really excited to be here. And Lubbock's a good place to be.
All right, so now that we've hit these key points for this year, moving forward, Lisa's gonna explain to you how to use our website and what all's on there.
No, please hold your applause. No. Hold your applause. Thank you. So they say save the best for last, so that's why Greg's gonna talk next. So all of the information that Greg, Grant, Ryan, and Jackson have brought to you today can be found on our website, gogettersmultifamily.com. We keep it updated throughout the year, so come back and check it often so that you can have the most up-to-date information. We also have some information on other smaller markets that aren't in your books. So if you're interested in those markets, it'll be there. And if you can't find a market on the map, just email one of us and we'll be able to get that information for you. And as a note, if you know anyone that wasn't able to come today and you want to share this information with them, we will have a recording up on our website, as well as a downloadable copy of the magazine. And we do have some other physical copies if you would like another one. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, so now we have time for some Q's, maybe an A. If we don't know the answer, we'll get it for you. So if anybody jot down any notes, shout them out. We'll see if we can answer them.
Easy questions only.
Okay.
All right.
Well, the answer may be in your book. Uh-huh. Well, those two things just look at wage growth, which is, on Esri or Shop to Do Business, they keep up with that, and then rent growth. So inflation, inflation could impact, wages, but this is just a forward-looking 5-year deal. And I know it's a huge gap. 11.5% a year for 5 years seems crazy. But when you look at the last couple of years, when you're at 5, 7, 8%, it could happen. The main thing is that people are making enough money in this town to afford higher rents. That answer? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, we promised to have you out of here as soon as about 25 minutes. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to the LAA for putting this on. Lisa, Grant, Jackson, Ryan. All right, if any of you need anything, we'd love the opportunity to help you. And thanks again.
Thank you guys. That was awesome. It gets better every year, sharper every year. That was great. Thank you. Feel free to keep eating, keep hanging out. Our next lunch is February 16th. Is that State of the City? No. Nope. Just a luncheon, and that will be back here. State of the City. February 28th is the State of the City. So get those on your calendars. Thank you guys for coming. If you would like to sponsor a lunch, come talk to Suzanne. Thank you guys.